Chapter 9. Rikakar Yukarsoder Clash at the Fonbo Portal C. Fleet 1 of the Thunderpeel Fleet, a Vanguard Recon Corps, was made up of 9 recon subfleets, and those subfleets were lined up along the border with the PSSU. Unlike their land-world counterparts, borders in planar space were extremely fuzzy and ambiguous. In practice, they were not lines, but rather whole surfaces of significant breadth. Virtually none of the portals scattered around that area were in use. Of course, the percentage of portals that were used as gateways in and out of star systems was extremely slight to begin with. It was just that tendency was even more marked in those border areas. In one of those portals, Sodek Bybor Dandanabuzer, Busek Portal 3077, lurked the recon subfleet that was under the direct command of the Glaherer Byrer Kosna Rodrakar, Thunderpeel Fleet 1 Commander-in-Chief. That subfleet's name was the Arlatek. The PSSU actually claimed possession over Busek Portal 3077, and the Empire hadn't objected to that claim. One might ask whether that meant Fleet 1 had already executed the invasion of PSSU, but that wasn't the case. Just because the Empire hadn't objected didn't mean it had ever acknowledged the claim as valid. The Empire was not in the habit of nailing down what nation each of the portals situated in remote regions belonged to, as this was of no use to the Empire. In 3 space, the closest star to Busek Portal 3077 was 3.7 light-years away. Moreover, that star had no planets. The subfleet was accompanied by mobile antimatter fuel factories that converted stellar light into antiprotons and positrons, but operating those here would be meaningless. A patrol ship of the Arlatek was circling Busek Portal 3077, the phosphorescent orb glowing dimly amidst the darkness. On the commander's bridge of the patrol ship Bunarath, the flagship of the recon subfleet Arlatek, as well as the Glagak Byrer Kosna Rodrakar, Thunderpeel Fleet 1 flagship. The scheduled time has come, reported the Chief of Staff, Associate Commodore Bobgam. Then shall we begin, said the Commander-in-Chief, Grand Commodore Ados Raiwa. All ships set sail. The group of patrol ships rushed toward Busek Portal 3077. They knew that the enemy had likely picked up on the Arlatek's activity to some extent. They tried moving sluggishly like a transport corps would, so as not to reveal themselves as a recon subfleet, but they were unsure this ruse succeeded. The first target of the corps directly commanded by Ados Raiwa had been designated as the Scythe Famber, Fonbo star system. The system had been maintained by the PSSU as a frontier region supply base. It had a semi-populated land world with large-scale antimatter fuel factories and simple repair stations among the facilities installed. They would first seize Fonbo and make it a strategic base. Fleet 1's mission was simply to act as a scouting party, but for a large-scale operation like this one, a base of operations in enemy territory was necessary. According to prior intel, Fonbo's antimatter fuel supply capacity wasn't high, but analysis predicted it would be possible for the star forces to compensate for that. The Arlatek transferred over to planar space and charged in a column of single-ship bubbles. In planar space, lighter meant faster. Keeping one ship to each bubble made each of those bubbles move as fast as possible. Even so, it would take them an estimated 74 hours and 17 minutes by ship's time to reach the Sodek Famber, Fonbo portal. A change occurred in the planar space, which had previously been the picture of tranquility 18 hours and 51 minutes after the Arlatek emerged from Busek Portal 3077. 2,776 Kettleher in the 2 o'clock direction, a swarm of bubbles was observed splitting apart, having emerged from Sodek Sakensakangana Buzer, Busek Portal 998. Ados Raiwa summoned her staff officers without delay and held a meeting. Samsur 100 is believed to be the enemy, reported the information staff officer. Samsur 100 was a provisional appellation for the unidentified group. Though it was clear they weren't Allied ships, there was the possibility they were a civilian convoy. If these were just non-combatants fleeing in anticipation of the Empire's invasion, they could be ignored. Yet all signs indicated otherwise. Busek Portal 998 was a portal without any utility, just like Busek Portal 3077. There was no reason a civilian convoy would stop by the area. Then there was the course they were taking. It was plain to see they were headed for an encounter with the Arlatek. That would be a strange choice for civilians fleeing from the enemy fleet, but made all the sense in the world for a combat corps intending to impede an invasion. Assuming they're all battleships, how much firepower do they have overall? Asked Ados Raiwa. About a half squadron's worth, replied the exploration staff officer. If unarmed ships were mixed in among that group, then their actual strength was even lower. If we do end up engaging, we'd beat them hands down, murmured Ados Raiwa. This didn't make her particularly happy. Fleet One's mission was reconnaissance. Preserving their full strength was a more meritorious deed than exterminating a small enemy corps. Besides, the full-scale maneuvers were yet to start. These were still just the preparatory stages. Estimated encounter point now in. 2 intersecting lines appeared on the planar space map. Naturally, the enemy's course was nothing more than a prediction. It could change at the enemy's pleasure. Meanwhile, their own course was what was scheduled, but it wasn't as though it couldn't be altered. Is it possible to evade them and infiltrate Fonbo? Asked Ados Raiwa. The planned route of the Arlatek, as displayed on the planar space map, changed under the supposition that the very likely to be the enemy group of ships wanted to battle. It was indeed possible to reach Fonbo without encountering the enemy, but the route was too roundabout. It would make them so late to arrive that the operation would have a tough time working around it, or so the analysis found. Plus, said Ados Raiwa bitterly, if we enter the Fonbo portal the long way around, they might be waiting for us outside the portal. Indeed, ma'am, said the chief of staff. Evading them is pointless. Then stay the course. Aim for the shortest possible distance to the Fonbo portal. And continue paying attention to Samsur 100. She herself thought her orders were quite banal, but taking some kind of eccentric third way would be meaningless. The encounter would take place in 40 hours, 19 minutes time at the earliest. Needless to say, it could take longer depending on Samsur 100's activity. After a short while, Samsur 100 changed direction toward Fonbo. If they kept on going, the encounter would not take place near the Fonbo portal. That moment, swarms of bubbles emerged from the portals in the surroundings as well, and they showed signs of gathering at Fonbo. The bubble swarms were each given the provisional name Samsur followed by their own respective sequential serial numbers. Though Ados Raiwa had initially viewed Samsur 100's movements as a nuisance, now that she saw the different Samsurs were in the process of amassing at Fonbo, she thought of it as convenient for them. The plan had been to scout out the portals in the area after securing Fonbo. Then the ships of the Arlatek would act primarily independently of one another. Taken together, they only made for a single squadron at most. As a general rule, ships doing recon were supposed to avoid combat, but sometimes they would stumble into an engagement and be forced to fight. If small-scale battles kept flaring up, it was possible they could be put in a losing position at some point. It was preferable to go willingly into combat just once while they had superior firepower. That way, they could minimize damages. Yet after a while, Ados Raiwa grew uneasy once again. It was becoming clearer and clearer that there were more enemy forces lurking in this remote region than expected. Their chance of victory was still exceedingly high, but it meant they wouldn't be able to avoid taking a not insignificant amount of damage. Nevertheless, they couldn't be left alone. Otherwise, they were risking the patrol ships that would be sent out in every direction once they made Fonbo an operational base getting wrecked. Ados Raiwa was left with 2 options. The first was to give up on scouting out the area. The fact that the enemy was here in higher numbers than expected had been confirmed, after all. They could choose to leave the rest to the main forces and steer the Arlatek to another sector. The range that Fleet 1 was to scout out was wide enough to do so. More specifically, they could make the Zambezi star system, the system that the recon subfleet Celsus was preparing to secure, their strategic base. The second option was to stick to their original course of action and seize Fonbo. Naturally, she didn't plan to wait until the enemy had their defenses fully set up. They would attack before the gathering of forces was complete, crushing the enemy's most powerful corps before sweeping up the remnants. Afterward, they would press ahead with their reconnaissance. Ados Raiwa had her staff officers analyze the 2 options. Option 1 was preferable if they wished to keep their losses to a minimum. But Ados Raiwa commanded not just this subfleet, but also the entirety of Fleet 1. She couldn't restrict her thinking to the Arlatek. Her number one priority was the successful execution of the recon mission. After all, the whole point of preserving their strength was to get a grasp of the enemy's movements with greater efficiency. The staff officers couldn't reach a conclusion. There wasn't enough info to go on, though that was a foregone outcome considering Fleet 1, whose ships were supposed to gather that info, wasn't fully operational quite yet. Which of the two is the more advantageous option can't be determined through concrete numbers, ma'am, reported Chief of Staff Bogaf. From the first, it was up to Ados Raiwa, the commander-in-chief, to decide. Even if she was only supplied with this fodder for making a decision and nothing more, she had to accept it. It's refreshing. A novel sensation, Ados Raiwa told Bogaf with feeling. What is, ma'am? Being on the battlefield, racking my head trying to figure out how not to fight. Such is recon work, ma'am. See, I got my start in an assault ship. Maybe my advancement to a raid ship was a mistake. Put simply, raid ships were patrol ships without mobile space-time mines. However, they were closer to assault ships in terms of their operation procedures. They never did anything like single-ship recon deep past enemy lines. I truly enjoy this work, ma'am. How I envy you, said Ados Raiwa facetiously. Come to think of it, I heard rumors that the Archduchess of Latepan wanted the Fleet 1 commander-in-chief position. She has a long career as a recon corps commander. I wonder what she found so fun about it. Don't get me wrong, of course, I understand what an important task it is. But given what I've heard tell of her personality, I don't think the mission's importance informs her liking it or not. While I myself have never served under Lonnie Spoor, I have spoken to someone who served in her staff, and I am told she assesses herself as having a save amusements for later personality. I wonder if to her, recon work is the fast that whets the appetite for the feast. That may just be, ma'am. I may be a noble myself, but I'm a poor one. I could never imitate the Archduchess. Let's enjoy ourselves how we can a little at a time. Now, which one are we doing first? I deem Samsur 007 as the optimal first target. He'd drawn the same conclusion Ados Raiwa had. Samsur 007 was the next largest enemy corps after Samsur 100. Little was clearly known about all of the Samsurs, so their relative strength couldn't truly be evaluated, but if they really were all enemy corps, destroying 007 before the troops gathered would cause the enemy's total strength in front of Fonbo to drop by about a third. Even as things stood now, the OV's victory was definite, but taking care of Samsur 007 first would solidify that victory even further and ensure that they would win with only slight damage. All right, let's mop up starting with them. Roger that, nodded Bogaf. The strategic proposals are already prepared. Is there also one for if the enemy flees? Bogaf looked wounded. Of course there is, ma'am. You're right, I'm sorry. The Arlitech followed the proposal, heading toward the estimated point of encounter with Samsur 007. The estimated power gap ratio was 1:7. Samsur 007 didn't evacuate, probably because they didn't have the fuel. The only place in the sector that had fuel resupply capability was Fonbo. If they had been aiming for another portal from the beginning, they would have had a means of escape, but they had no way of taking a different path. In the end, Samsur 007 responded as best they could. They surrendered. Samsur 007 ended up being a small corps of assault ships. Since they were small-scale ships, they could have fled swiftly through planar space by forming single-ship bubbles. The large, heavy patrol ships that made up the Arlitech wouldn't have been able to give chase. It was the lack of fuel that held them back. They didn't have enough of it to shake off the Arlitech. Having said that, they had no chance of winning if they had fought. In short, surrender was the only way to survive. Given that the recon subfleet Arlitech was not damaged, it would have been nice to be able to be grateful, but it didn't turn out like that. Although Samsur 007 had surrendered, they could hardly bring enemy ships into the battlefield. They captured a single enemy ship for purposes of investigation, with the rest discarded to be swallowed by planar space. What hurt, however, was that a patrol ship had to be set aside to evacuate the prisoners of war from the front. I wonder whether we would have lost more had there been a fight, said Ados Raiwa, after the disposal was over with. No, ma'am. In all likelihood, we wouldn't have lost a ship, replied Bogaf. I figured as much. It was perhaps the best tactical maneuver the enemy could have done using the lackluster firepower they had. Atos Raiwa couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been swindled. The Samsers apart from 007 came together and obstructed the path of the Arlatek, which was heading for the Fonbo portal. I really wish they'd do us a favor and surrender, thought Atos Raiwa. The three-space side of the Fonbo portal had almost no military strength left. If they surrendered, they'd simply be disarmed and travel through the portal together. Unfortunately, the enemy responded to the Arlatek's signal of challenge with their own. Guess I couldn't have expected otherwise, she muttered to herself, before issuing the order to prepare for battle. How should we conduct the mine battle? Asked Bobgaf. For patrol ships, mobile space-time mines were a precious resource. Each patrol ship could only carry a few. The prospect of resupplying after capturing Fonbo was there, but it wouldn't be possible to do so immediately. Bobgaf was inquiring as to his commanding officer's wishes because it was estimated that they could also win without using mines. Let's do it. And splashily at that, decided Atos Raiwa. Mines could be resupplied, but those killed in action would never return. The drawback was that since they'd only be able to resupply later down the line, they'd have to continue operations without the mines for a while. On the other hand, if they wiped out the Samsers, then the ammo shortage could be tolerated to an extent. I believe it would be best to limit it to half our supply, said Bobgaf. Then that's what we'll do. They could expect a complete victory either way. The interbubble communication ordering the ships to prepare for mine battle was sent from the patrol ship Bunarath. The Glagak Byrer Kosna, Fleet 1 flagship, Bunarath used practically all of its mine deck as its command facility, and there were no mines aboard ship, but all of the ships under its command had ejected half their mines. That being said, since this was still the preparatory stage of the operation, each of those ships' mines stayed within their respective bubbles. The designated targets of the mine volley were sent from the Bunarath to each ship in turn. The enemy was the first side to actually fire their mines. It's a surprisingly dense swarm, remarked Atos Raiwa. Bearing in mind the analyses of the information we've accrued thus far, said Bobgaf, they can't have many battle-line ships. I dare say they loaded mines onto supply ships. Then I wonder whether they've any more firepower left to speak of. It's not likely they do, ma'am. But it didn't matter that the enemy had next to no remaining war potential. Atos Raiwa had zero intention of being lazy about this. All of our ships have completed preparations for the mine assault, reported the communications staff officer. Atos Raiwa nodded. Fire. In unison, mine bubbles split off from the patrol ship bubbles of the Arlatek. Oftentimes during mine battles, mine counteroffensives were launched. Mines from opposing sides destroyed each other, thinning out the number of mines that made it all the way to the opposing ship's position. Recon Corps, on the other hand, rarely ever launched mine counteroffensives. The mines on patrol ships were precious and valuable. Atos Raiwa didn't order a counteroffensive, for their objective was destroying the enemy ships. The Star Force's mines ignored the enemy's mines and hurtled in the Fonbo portal's direction. Needless to say, the enemy mines did not likewise ignore their Star Force's counterparts. They hunted down the mine bubbles fired by the Arlatek as though possessed by a loathing for their own kind. Thus did a fair number of mines get taken out and converted into space-time particles. Suddenly, the remaining enemy mines came at the Star Forces, pushing their way through the space-time particle ripples triggered by the dying mines. Enemy mines making impact shortly, said the exploration staff officer. Atos Raiwa's eyes fell on the planar space map projected over the floor. Each of the squadrons of the recon subfleet Arlatek assumed single-line formations and squared off against the enemy. The bubble of the ship at the lead and the lightweight bubble thought to be an enemy mine were now fusing. The bubbles that went past then got sucked into the second and third single-ship bubbles. 5 bubbles shot through the columns of the Arlatek, only to then take a sharp turn and attack the rearmost ships. The flagship Bunarath was stationed at the back as well, and one bubble was closing in on them. Dealing with these kinds of things was the ship commander's job. There was nothing Fleet Command could do about it. All hands, prepare the EM cannons for a fusillade, came the on-board announcement. So the ship commander plans to use the EM cannons to intercept the mines, thought Atos Raiwa. Mines fusing in 10 seconds, came the speakers once again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fusing. That moment, the commander's bridge shook faintly. The Bunarath had fired its EM cannons at the mine. Enemy mine destroyed, came the announcement soon after. Relief flooded the bridge. Report present damages, said Ados Raiwa. Damages are extremely minimal, ma'am, reported Bogaff. The patrol ships Borath and Sidrath took point-blank hits and sustained hull damage, but that is about all. It hasn't affected their combat or navigational abilities. I see. Mobile space-time mines packed extreme explosive power, so they could cause damage even if properly intercepted. Meanwhile, it was estimated that the enemy corps lost around a fifth of its ships to the mine volley. This widened the power gap further still in the Empire's favor. Ados Raiwa concluded that the outcome of the battle was truly set in stone now, but the enemy had apparently concluded otherwise, as they weren't surrendering. One after the other, the Arlatex patrol ships fused with enemy ships. Space-time bubbles were isolated pockets of fourth-dimensional space-time, each a universe in its own right. The battle raged on inside multiple mini-universes, and in most every one of them, the star forces prevailed. Yet they couldn't manage to win unscathed. A sad report. The patrol ship Kareth has been destroyed. The Kareth was the only ship the star forces lost in this clash. The clash at the Fonbo Portal C marked the rising of the curtain on Operation Thunderpeel, and one could get away with calling it a total victory for the star forces.